Welcome to Baker Street Sleuth. The fire is warm, but the mystery tonight is chilling. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from?
Do like and subscribe for more tales from the archives. And please, leave your story suggestions in the comments.
I set down these events as they occurred in the autumn of 1890, when the fogs of London were at their thickest and most choking, and when the great city seemed to breathe sulphur and coal smoke with every gust. The bitter cold seeped through even the thickest greatcoats, and the gas lamps burned dim yellow halos in the murk. It was a season when men hurried home early, and crimes like the fog itself found cover in the gloom. Chapter 1. The First Link. I set down these events as they occurred in the autumn of 1890, when the fogs of London wrapped the city in a choking yellowish-brown shroud. The bitter cold seeped through overcoats and mufflers alike. Every breath carried the acrid bite of coal smoke, mingled with the rotten, earthy tang of Thames mud that the damp wind dragged inland from the river. At 221B Baker Street, the coal fire crackled steadily in the grate, pushing back the chill that pressed against the window panes. The warm glow of the gas lamps reflected on the worn leather of our armchairs, and the smooth, polished bowl of Holmes's pipe. I had just returned from my club, my boots still cold and damp from the slick cobblestones, when Mrs. Hudson's knock announced a visitor. A tall, angular gentleman stepped into the sitting room. His well-cut overcoat bore the stains of the fog, and his face was pale, ashy eyes red-rimmed from something more than weather. He introduced himself as Mr. Reginald Ashcroft, solicitor of Gray's Inn, and sank into the chair I offered with a tremor he could not quite conceal. "Mr. Holmes," he began, voice low and urgent, "my client, Sir Edmund Vale, has been found dead in his locked study at Vale House in Belgravia. The door was bolted from the inside. The windows were latched and barred. No key was discovered upon his person, and the study key itself has vanished entirely. Scotland Yard declares it suicide. I am convinced it is murder." Holmes, who had been idly drawing the bow across his Stradivarius, set the violin aside at once. He leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes gleaming with that peculiar light I knew so well. "Proceed, Mr. Ashcroft. Every detail, however small." Sir Edmund Vale, Ashcroft explained, was a wealthy widower of 62, who lately returned from years in India, where he had built a fortune in tea. He lived quietly in Belgravia with only a small staff: butler Hargrove, cook Mrs. Grady, 2 maids, and a secretary, Mr. Lionel Thorne. The previous evening Sir Edmund had dined alone, then retired to his study to examine accounts. At 10 o'clock Hargrove carried up a final cup of strong tea with lemon. He heard the heavy bolt slide home behind the closing door. No one entered or left the room after that. This morning, when knocks received no answer, the door was forced. Sir Edmund lay slumped at his desk, a single bullet wound through the heart. His own old service revolver lay inches from his right hand. 3 spent cartridges glittered on the carpet beside 3 empty chambers. The suicide note upon the blotter read in his firm hand, "Forgive me, the burden is too great." Ashcroft handed over a photograph of the dead man and a copy of the note. Holmes studied both under the lamplight, nostrils flaring slightly at the faint scent of tobacco still clinging to the paper. "Scotland Yard sees a locked room suicide," Holmes murmured. "You do not. Why?" "Because Sir Edmund feared violent death," Ashcroft answered. Only last week he confided that he believed someone close wished him harm. He spoke of a hidden key that would unlock a secret he dared not name. And the revolver. He detested firearms. He kept it unloaded in a drawer merely as an Indian curiosity. Holmes rose and paced rapidly before the fire, drawing thoughtfully upon his pipe. The strong shag tobacco mingled with the coal smoke in the warm air. "We go to Vale House at once," he declared. "The game is afoot." The hansom cab rattled through the fog-bound streets, wheels clattering on wet cobbles, horses' hooves echoing sharply. Fog horns moaned low along the Thames. At Vale House, Inspector Lestrade waited in the hall, a face sour beneath the flickering gaslight. The study remained untouched. Gunpowder hung sharp in the air, undercut by lingering pipe tobacco, and the ever-present coal smoke that permeated the heavy curtains. Chalk marks outlined where the body had fallen. Papers lay scattered on the desk beside an inkwell and the note. Holmes knelt immediately, lens in hand. "Observe, Watson, the first link." He indicated a faint reddish-brown smudge near the door, no larger than a sixpence. Clay mixed with lamp-black or soot. It does not belong to this Wilton carpet. He crossed to the window. The latch is secure, yet here, a fresh scratch on the brass. The sill carries the same reddish trace. Lestrade gave a short laugh. A man can scratch metal while brooding over his pistol. "Perhaps," Holmes said calmly. "But consider the second link. 4 chambers fired, yet only 1 bullet struck flesh. 3 cartridges spent, yet the window is closed, curtains undisturbed. No one in this thick-walled house heard 3 shots. The fog muffled everything," Lestrade muttered. "And the third link," Holmes continued, "the missing key. Bolted from within, no key in lock or pocket. Why remove it after death, unless to create an impossible crime?" He turned to me. "The links lie before us, Watson. Did you forge the chain before I spoke? Mud on the sill, extra shots, absent key. What would you deduce?" I saw pieces, but not the pattern. Holmes smiled faintly. "Well, the mud betrays an entry by unconventional means. The extra cartridges suggest misdirection, perhaps blanks to mask the fatal shot. And the key, someone held a duplicate, used it, then carried it away to preserve the locked room illusion." His gaze grew distant. "It recalls the adventure of the empty room Whitechapel, 89. A man shot in a bolted garret, key inside. I found boot prints in chimney soot leading to a hidden passage. The murderer entered, fired once, retreated, and locked the door with a key he took with him. The ground remembers every step, Watson. Here, too, the room will speak. Sir Edmund did not end his own life. Someone entered, killed, and escaped, leaving the appearance of impossibility. The first link forged, the chain begins. Chapter 2. Forging Connections. The following morning broke grey and raw, the fog still clinging low over London's rooftops like damp felt. At 221 B. Baker Street the coal fire snapped and hissed, it filling the room, with welcome warmth against the bitter chill outside. The sharp aroma of Mrs. Hudson's strong coffee blended with the heavy, sweet bite of Holmes's shag tobacco as we finished a hurried breakfast. Damp newspapers lay open on the table, their ink smudging my fingers when I turned the pages. Holmes was already in his ulster and deerstalker. 5 persons demand our attention today, Watson, he said, tapping ash from his pipe into the coal scuttle. The butler Hargrove, who controlled the duplicate keys, the secretary Lionel Thorne, privy to Sir Edmund's private affairs, the cook Mrs. Grady, who prepared the last cup of tea, the maid Eliza, and the nephew, Captain Reginald Vale, who inherits the estate. Each interview will add links. The chain grows only when men speak truth or lies. We descended the 17 steps to the street and hailed a hansom cab. The wheels clattered over wet cobblestones. The horses' hooves rang out sharply in the muffled air. The foghorns groaned along the Thames as we made our way to Belgravia. Vale House stood silent and imposing, its windows dulled by the persistent mist. Hargrove received us in the servants' hall, where the air carried the clean sting of carbolic soap and the lingering fat of yesterday's roast. The butler was immaculate in black coat and white gloves, but a faint tremor showed in his hands as he poured tea. "I served Sir Edmund faithfully for 15 years, Hargrove said, voice low and measured. "He bolted the study door himself. I heard the iron slide home at 10 minutes past 10. The tea I carried up was ordinary Indian black, with a slice of lemon, as he preferred. Nothing else touched the cup." Holmes watched him steadily. "You hold the duplicate keys to the study?" "2 keys, both kept in the locked pantry drawer. Neither was removed last night. I checked them myself this morning." "Yet the original key has vanished," Holmes observed quietly. "Sir Edmund once mentioned a hidden key. You heard the phrase?" Hargrove hesitated. "Only once, sir, some weeks ago. He spoke of it in passing, as though it were a private matter from his Indian days. I thought it figurative." We moved to the library next. Lionel Thorne sat at a desk piled with ledgers, his thin fingers ink-stained, a faint smell of Macassar oil and nervous perspiration about him. He rose quickly when we entered. Sir Edmund had been troubled for months, Thorne admitted, his eyes darting to the door. He feared someone wished him ill, someone in the household, perhaps. He spoke of altering his will. Captain Vale's debts in Calcutta had angered him greatly. "Did you hear any shots?" Holmes asked. "Only one, around 11:30. I assumed it was a door slamming downstairs. The walls here are thick, and the fog deadens sound." Holmes made a small note in his pocketbook. 1 shot reported, yet 3 cartridges were expended. A curious inconsistency. In the kitchen, Mrs. Grady stood over a bubbling pot, the warm smell of baking bread fighting the ever-present coal smoke that drifted down from the range. She was stout, red-faced, and spoke with the bluntness of long service. "I made the tea exactly as always," she declared, wiping floury hands on her apron. "Strong, hot lemon slice floating. Sir Edmund drank it every night for 20 years. If there was poison, it wasn't from my pot. I'd stake my life on it." The young maid Eliza met us in the passage, eyes red from crying. She twisted her apron in her hands and could add little, beyond confirming she had polished the study silver that afternoon and seen nothing unusual. Our last visit took us to the Reform Club in Pall Mall. The morning room smelled richly of leather upholstery, old brandy, and cigar smoke. Captain Reginald Vale lounged in a deep chair, florid-faced and loud-voiced, and a glass of sherry already in hand. "My uncle was a damned skinflint," he declared without preamble. "Cut me off after one bad run at cards in Calcutta. I was nowhere near Belgravia last night, playing whist here until 2 in the morning. 6 members will swear to it." Holmes regarded him coolly. "Yet you called at Vale House 2 days ago." The captain's colour deepened. "Family business, nothing more." We returned to Baker Street as the short winter day faded, and the fog was thickening again, gas lamps burning pale halos in the murk. Holmes paced before the fire, pipe clenched between his teeth. the smooth wood warm against his palm. "Links are forming, Watson," he said after a time. "Hargrove's tremor speaks of fear, not necessarily guilt." Thorne knows more than he admits, perhaps about the will. The captain's alibi is solid, but his motive glaring. The tea remains innocent, yet Sir Edmund died swiftly after drinking it. And the missing key, still the central puzzle. He paused, eyes distant, then plucked a few idle notes from the violin strings that lay across his chair. India haunts this case. Sir Edmund's fortune, his fears, his hidden key, all point eastward. Tomorrow we return to the study. The room has not yet yielded all its secrets. The chain takes shape. Chapter 3. The chain grows. The third day dawned colder still, the fog now so dense it muffled even the clatter of hansom cabs in Baker Street. At 221B, the coal fire burned low but steady, its warmth battling the damp chill that seeped through the window frames. The air carried the sharp tang of Holmes's tobacco, mingled with the faint, bitter scent of yesterday's coffee grounds left in the pot. I had barely finished dressing when Holmes announced we must return to Vale House without delay. "The study has not spoken all it knows," he said, wrapping his scarf tightly. "We return to the scene. Fresh eyes in fresh light may reveal what yesterday's gloom concealed." The ride through Belgravia was slow, the horses' hooves thudding dully on wet stones, the driver cursing softly at the murk. Fog horns sounded mournful along the river, and the gas lamps burned pale orange halos that barely pierced the yellow-brown veil. Inspector Lestrade met us at the door, his bowler hat dripping moisture, his expression one of weary tolerance. "Back again, Mr. Holmes. The case is closed. Suicide. Plain as day. But if you insist on poking about—" The study smelled stronger now of stale gunpowder and old pipe tobacco, undercut by the damp newspaper tang that clung to everything in the fog. Holmes moved at once to the bookcase that lined the wall opposite the desk, a tall, heavy piece of mahogany filled with leather-bound volumes on India, tea trade, and colonial history. He ran his fingers along the shelves, pausing at irregular intervals. "Observe, Watson, the fourth link." He pointed to a thin line of dust on the lower shelf, disturbed in a narrow vertical stripe, as though something had been pulled outward recently. "The books here are not flush, a fraction of an inch proud, enough to notice only on close inspection." He tugged gently at a volume titled The Plantations of Assam. The entire section of 3 shelves swung outward with a soft creak, revealing a narrow space behind, barely wide enough for a man to pass sideways, as the hidden passage smelled of old plaster dust and faint lamp oil, its walls cold and rough to the touch. Lestrade stared, mouth open. "A priest's hole, in Belgravia." "Or an architect's whim," Holmes replied. "Built perhaps when the house was new, or added later for some private purpose." Sir Edmund knew of it, hence his talk of a hidden key. But someone else knew also. We stepped inside. The passage ran parallel to the study wall for perhaps 10 feet before turning sharply right. At the far end, a small iron ladder led upward to a trapdoor in the ceiling. Access, Holmes judged, to the attics above. Below, another short flight descended toward what must have been the garden level. Holmes knelt and examined the floorboards with his lens. The fifth link, fresh boot marks, size 10, military style, rubber heel. The tread matches none of the servants' shoes. And here, another trace of that same reddish clay mixed with soot, leading both ways. He straightened. "The chain grows stronger." Someone entered via this passage, fired the fatal shot, then retreated the way he came, locking the study door from inside with the original key, which he carried away. The 3 extra cartridges. Likely blanks fired in the passage to confuse timing and direction of sound. Lestrade rubbed his chin. But who, and why leave the revolver? To complete the suicide illusion, a man who shoots himself does not hide his key, unless the murderer wished the impossibility to be absolute. Holmes turned to me, eyes bright. The links connect now, Watson. Disturbed dust on the secret door, boot prints in the passage, matching clay on sill and floor. Did you see the chain forming before I pulled the bookcase? What would you conclude from these 5 links? I admitted the passage changed everything, yet the motive and hand remained shadowy. Holmes nodded. Let me forge the connections fully. This recalls the adventure of the Norwood builder in '93. A man vanished from a locked room, yet I found a secret cupboard behind a false wall, fresh sawdust on the floor, and a single thumbprint in blood. The criminal had hidden in the house itself, emerging only to strike. Here the principle is the same. Ground conceals nothing from the trained eye. The passage was the killer's path, in and out. Sir Edmund did not die alone in that room. He died with his murderer at his side, separated only by a hidden door. We emerged from the passage. Holmes closed the bookcase carefully, restoring the illusion of solidity. Lestrade was already sending a constable for measurements and photographs. "Back to Baker Street," Holmes said. "The chain grows stronger with each link. Tonight we consider who among our suspects might have known this secret, and why Sir Edmund feared to name it." The fog pressed thicker as we left, the cold biting through my coat. But the logic bound tighter now. No locked room could withstand such evidence. The chain grows stronger. Logic binds. Chapter 4. Testing the links. The fog had lifted slightly by the 4th morning, leaving a raw, damp cold that clung to the skin like wet wool. At 221B Baker Street, the coal fire burned bright, its warmth welcome against the chill that still seeped through the floorboards. The air carried the familiar mix of Holmes's strong tobacco, with the faint bitterness of cooling tea, and the sharp, clean smell of carbolic from Mrs. Hudson's morning scrubbing downstairs. Holmes stood by the window, fingers steepled beneath his chin, staring into the grey street below. "We have discovered the passage," he said without turning. "Now we test every link. Weak ones will shatter. The true chain will hold. Today we probe motives, alibis, and opportunities rapidly before suspicion hardens into certainty." We began at Vale House once more, and the first test came in the butler's pantry. Hargrove stood rigid as Holmes opened the locked drawer where the duplicate keys were kept. Both were present, brass gleaming under the gaslight. "These have not left this drawer since the night Sir Edmund died?" Holmes asked. "Neither has been touched, sir," Hargrove replied, voice steady but eyes wary. Holmes produced a small magnifying lens and examined the keyholes. "Yet this one bears a fresh scratch along the ward. Minute, but recent, as if tested in a lock not its own. A weak link, perhaps?" Hargrove paled. I may have tried it yesterday when the police asked, purely to confirm." Holmes said nothing, merely noted it in his pocketbook. The butler's tremor had returned. Our second call was to Lionel Thorne in the library. The secretary's hands shook slightly as he handed over a ledger of recent correspondence. Holmes flipped pages, pausing at a letter dated 3 weeks earlier. You wrote to Sir Edmund's solicitor in Calcutta, Holmes observed, regarding a codicil to the will, disinheriting Captain Vale entirely. Thorne swallowed. Sir Edmund instructed me. It was his wish. Yet the codicil was never signed, Holmes continued. Why? Sir Edmund delayed. He said he needed more time to consider family ties. Holmes closed the ledger with a soft snap. A link that bends but does not yet break. You knew of the passage behind the bookcase. Thorne's eyes widened. No. Oh, sir, I swear it. We moved swiftly to the kitchen. Mrs. Grady was kneading dough, flour dusting her arms like pale ash. The warm smell of rising bread fought the coal smoke drifting from the range. Sir Edmund's tea that night, Holmes asked. Who carried the tray up besides Hargrove? No one, sir, she answered firmly. I poured it. Hargrove took it. That's the way it always was. Did you notice anything unusual in the pantry that evening? She hesitated. Only that one of the lemon slices was missing from the bowl. I thought Eliza had taken it for her tea. Holmes nodded once. Another small link, easily overlooked. Next we visited the young maid Eliza in the upper corridor. She curtsied nervously, the rough texture of her apron twisting in her fingers. You polished the study silver that afternoon, Holmes said. Did you touch the bookcase? Only to dust the shelves, sir, she whispered. I didn't move any books. Did you hear the bookcase creak at any time? Her eyes filled. Once, late, after Sir Edmund locked himself in. I thought it was the house settling. Holmes regarded her kindly. Fear not. Truth strengthens the chain. Our final test took us to Captain Reginald Vale's lodgings in St. James's. The captain received us in a cluttered sitting room smelling of cigar smoke, spilled brandy, and damp wool from his greatcoat drying by the fire. He was in shirt-sleeves, though face flushed. You claim an alibi at the Reform Club, Holmes began. Yet a club porter recalls you leaving at 10:15 after Sir Edmund bolted his door. The captain blustered. Nonsense. I was back by 11. Holmes produced a small envelope. A handsome cab receipt, time-stamped 10:40, Belgravia direction, signed R. Vale. The captain's colour drained. I may have stepped out for air, but I never went to my uncle's house. Holmes leaned forward. You knew of his Indian secrets. You knew he kept a service revolver, and you stood to lose everything if the codicil was signed. Vale sank into a chair. I hated him, yes, but I didn't kill him. We returned to Baker Street as dusk gathered, the gas lamps flickering to life in the thinning fog. Holmes paced before the fire, pipe in hand, the smooth stem warm between his teeth. Several links have bent under pressure, he said quietly. Hargrove's scratched key suggests familiarity with locks. Thorne's knowledge of the will gives motive. The captain's broken alibi is the weakest, yet perhaps too obvious. Eliza's mention of the creaking bookcase points to someone using the passage that very night. He stopped, eyes gleaming. The clay traces match none of their boots precisely. The hidden key, still missing, must have been used to lock the door from inside after the shot. Someone carried it away. I watched him closely. You suspect the butler still? Suspicions are weak links until forged, Holmes replied. Tomorrow we seek the key itself, and the hand that held it. The weak links had shattered under test. The true chain began to emerge. Chapter 5. The Chain Tightens. By the 5th morning, the fog had thinned to a pale, ghostly veil, but the cold remained bitter, biting through gloves and scarves like steel wire. At 221 B. Baker Street, the coal fire roared high. its warmth spreading across the worn carpet and the smooth leather of our chairs. The room smelled of fresh tobacco from Holmes's pipe, mingled with the faint, sweet burn of brandy in the decanter and the lingering sharpness of carbolic from the landing below. Holmes stood before the mantel, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on the small clay sample he had scraped from the passage floor. Reddish-brown, streaked with black soot. "The passage is the key path," he said quietly. "Tonight we tighten the chain. We return to Vale House after dark. If the murderer used that hidden way once, he may return, perhaps to retrieve something left behind, or to remove final traces." I felt a stir of unease. "You expect danger?" "I expect movement," Holmes replied. "The game presses close now." We dined early, cold beef, bread and strong tea, then set out as dusk fell. The hansom cab rattled through dimly lit streets, wheels grinding on damp cobblestones, and the hoarse snorting plumes of steam in the chill air. Foghorns moaned low along the Thames, and Big Ben struck the hour, with deep, muffled tolls that seemed to come from underwater. Vale House stood dark and silent, its windows black mirrors reflecting the gas lamps across the square. Holmes had arranged with Lestrade for quiet entry. A single constable waited at the tradesman's door. We slipped inside, boots soft on the tiled passage. The house smelled of old wood polish, coal dust, and the faint metallic tang of gun oil from the study. Holmes led the way upstairs, lantern dimmed to a slit. We paused outside the study door. He pressed his ear to the panel, then motioned me to silence. From within came the faintest scrape, metal on metal, deliberate and slow. "The chain tightens," Holmes whispered. "Someone is inside." He turned the handle, unlocked now since the forced entry days before. The door swung open on oiled hinges. The room lay in near darkness, lit only by the faint glow of a bull's-eye lantern set on the desk. A figure crouched before the bookcase, back to us, one hand reaching for the same volume Holmes had pulled before. Holmes stepped forward, voice calm but edged with steel. "Step away from the bookcase, Hargrove. The game is over." The butler froze, then straightened slowly. In the lantern light, his face was grey, eyes wide with something between fear and resignation. He held a small brass key, the missing original, glinting in his palm. I came to confess," Hargrove said, voice cracking. "I could bear it no longer." Holmes moved closer, never raising his voice. "You used the passage that night. You entered after Sir Edmund bolted the door, fired the shot, then locked it from inside with this key before retreating. You carried the key away to preserve the impossibility. But you returned tonight. Why?" Hargrove's shoulders sagged. "To place it back, to make it seem suicide again. The guilt has eaten me alive." Holmes took the key gently from his hand. "The sixth link. This key bears your thumbprint in lampblack, fresh from handling it tonight. And the clay on your boots matches the passage floor precisely." I stepped forward, heart pounding. "But why, Hargrove? Sir Edmund trusted you." The butler's eyes filled. "He trusted me once. In India, 20 years ago, he was my captain. I was his batman. But there was an incident, a plantation fire set to cover embezzlement. Sir Edmund blamed me publicly to save his own name. I lost everything, rank, honour, future. I came to England under a new name, took service here to watch him suffer as I had. When he spoke of changing the will, I saw my chance." Holmes regarded him steadily. You fired blanks first to mask the sound, then the fatal shot. You knew the revolver was kept unloaded, yet you loaded it yourself days earlier, anticipating this night." Hargrove nodded once. I waited in the passage until he drank his tea. I stepped out, spoke his old name, Captain, and watched recognition turn to terror. One shot, then I locked the door and vanished. Holmes turned to me. "The chain tightens now, Watson. Disturbed dust, boot prints, scratched duplicate, broken alibi, and now the key itself, returned by the hand that stole it. Did you see the final link form before Hargrove spoke? What chain would you have built to this moment?" I confessed the pieces had aligned only now, in this shadowed room. Holmes gave a small, satisfied nod. "This recalls the adventure of the speckled band," he said softly. "A murderer used a hidden passage in the dead of night, a bell rope that was no rope, a whistle in the dark. There, too, the criminal returned to the scene, driven by fear of discovery. Here, guilt and the need to complete the illusion drew Hargrove back. The ground remembers. Watson! And so does the conscience." Lestrade arrived moments later with 2 constables. Hargrove offered no resistance as the irons were placed on his wrists. The cold metal clicked shut with a sound like the final link snapping into place. We stepped out into the night. The fog had cleared enough to show stars above the rooftops. The chain tightened. No escape now. Chapter 6. Links to the Past. The 6th day brought a rare clear sky over London, the first in weeks, although the cold remained sharp enough to sting the lungs with every breath. At 221 B. Baker Street, the coal fire crackled low, its warmth steady against the chill that lingered in the corners. The room smelled of fresh pipe tobacco. Holmes had just refilled from the Persian slipper, mingled with the faint sweetness of brandy from last night's glass, and the clean, soapy trace of Mrs. Hudson's polishing downstairs. I sat with my notebook open, still shaken from the night before, while Holmes stood motionless by the window, watching the pale sunlight glint off the wet rooftops. "Hargrove's confession closes one door," Holmes said quietly, "but opens another. The motive runs deeper than mere revenge. We must trace the links back to India, to the fire, the blame, the ruin. Only then will past and present form one unbroken chain." He turned, eyes bright. "Lestrade has sent Hargrove's effects from the house. Among them, a small tin box, locked. We open it now." The box lay on the table, tin-dented and tarnished, secured by a simple padlock. Holmes selected a pick from his desk drawer and worked it with delicate precision. The lock clicked open after a few moments. Inside rested yellowed letters, a faded photograph, and a single folded document stamped with the seal of the Bengal police. The photograph showed 2 young men in uniform. One tall and commanding, Captain Edmund Vale, standing beside a slimmer soldier with Hargrove's unmistakable features. Both smiled stiffly before a tea plantation backdrop, the air almost visible with heat and dust, even in the faded sepia. Holmes unfolded the police report first. Dated 1872. A fire at Vale's Assam plantation. Storehouses burned, ledgers destroyed. Losses claimed at £20,000. Official verdict, accidental, caused by an overturned lantern. But a confidential note from the investigating inspector reads, "Suspicion falls on Captain Vale himself. Possible insurance fraud. Evidence suppressed at request of higher authority. Private Batman, J. Hargrove, bore public blame, and was discharged in disgrace. I felt the weight of the words settle. So Sir Edmund sacrificed his own man to save himself. Precisely, Holmes replied. Hargrove lost his career, his pension, his good name. He drifted back to England under aliases, eventually finding service in Vale's household. Silent, patient, waiting. The hidden key was not merely to the study, it was the key to this old crime. Sir Edmund kept these papers locked away, perhaps as insurance against future questions. Hargrove knew where they were hidden, behind the bookcase, in a false panel we have yet to find. We returned to Vale House that afternoon. The house felt different now, hollow. It was as though the confession had drained its life. Hargrove's room in the servants' quarters had been searched, but Holmes insisted on the study once more. The bookcase still stood open from the night before, the passage dark and cold behind it. Holmes stepped inside with his lantern, running fingers along the rough plaster walls. At waist height, he paused. Here, the seventh link. A small brass plate, disguised as a nail head, pressed inward with a soft click. A narrow drawer slid out from the wall itself. Inside lay another set of papers, insurance claims from 1872, a receipt for a large payout to Vale, and a letter in Hargrove's hand, unsigned, undated, warning Sir Edmund, "The ground remembers. One day the fire will burn again." Holmes read aloud in a low voice, motive complete. Hargrove did not kill for money or inheritance. He killed to force acknowledgement, to make Sir Edmund face the past before death. The suicide note was forged. Hargrove wrote it in imitation of his master's hand, using samples from old letters. The burden too great was not Sir Edmund's guilt over imagined sins, but Hargrove's demand for justice long delayed. We emerged from the passage. The afternoon light slanted through the study windows, cold and pale on the carpet. Holmes paced slowly, drawing upon his pipe, the smooth stem warm against his lips. "Every link now connects," he said. "The passage from India, literal and figurative. The hidden key Hargrove kept for 20 years. The revolver loaded in advance, the blanks to confuse, the return to the scene, driven by conscience, and the need to place the key back before suspicion turned too soon." He stopped before the desk, eyes distant. "This echoes the adventure of the crooked man, Watson. A soldier wronged in India, returning years later to confront his betrayer in a locked room. There, too, and the past forged the present, old wounds reopened by a chance meeting, a single shot fired in rage. The chain of evidence stretched across decades, yet every link was forged in the same fire. Betrayal, silence, and the slow burn of resentment. Hargrove waited until the moment Sir Edmund spoke of changing the will, perhaps fearing exposure of the old fraud. That fear ignited the final act. I closed my notebook, the weight of the story settling on me. And the innocent? Thorne, Eliza, the captain, they suffered suspicion needlessly. "Logic clears them now," Holmes replied. "Thorne's knowledge of the codicil was real but irrelevant. The captain's debts genuine, his movements accounted for after all. Eliza's fear, only that of youth caught in a storm, not her own." We left the house as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across Belgravia Square. The air tasted sharp with coming frost, the cobblestones cold underfoot. Past and present had fused, one unbroken chain, forged in reason and tempered by time. Past and present, one unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The Complete Chain. The seventh day dawned with a pale winter sun that did little to warm the streets of London. At 221 B. Baker Street the coal fire burned steadily, its crackle a comforting counterpoint to the distant rumble of hansom cabs on wet cobblestones. The room smelled of strong shag tobacco, the faint metallic bite of gunpowder residue Holmes had brought back from Vale House on his coat, and the warm, sweet trace of brandy poured into 2 glasses for fortification. Inspector Lestrade had arrived early, accompanied by 2 constables and the prisoner Hargrove, still in irons but composed, his face pale but resolute. Holmes stood before the fireplace, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. "Gentlemen," he began, voice calm and measured, "the chain is complete, every link accounted for. Today I shall forge them one by one before you, so that no shadow of doubt remains. Mr. Hargrove, you will hear the evidence that binds you, and you, Lestrade, will see why Scotland Yard's suicide verdict could not stand." He turned first to the physical evidence. Link 1. The secret passage behind the bookcase. Disturbed dust on the shelf, fresh boot prints in the plaster dust within, matching traces of reddish clay mixed with lamp black on the sill and floor. These prove entry and exit, unseen by any servant. Hargrove alone knew the house intimately enough to discover or remember this hidden way. Built perhaps decades ago for some forgotten purpose, but known to him from long service. Link 2. The missing key. The study door bolted from within, yet no key found on Sir Edmund or in the room. The original key reappeared in Hargrove's hand last night when we surprised him replacing it. His thumbprint in fresh lampblack confirms he handled it recently. He used it to lock the door after the shot. Atherton carried it away to preserve the locked room illusion. Holmes moved to the timeline. Link 3, the sequence of the night. Hargrove brought the tea at 10:10, heard the bolt slide home. At 11:30, Thorne heard 1 shot, yet 3 cartridges were expended. Hargrove fired 2 blanks in the passage first to mask the fatal shot's timing and direction. The 3rd was the bullet that killed. He retreated immediately, locking the door behind him with the key he already held, a duplicate he had fashioned or kept from years past. Next came the witness links. Link 4, the servant's statements. Eliza heard the bookcase creak after the door was bolted, Hargrove moving through the passage. Mrs. Grady noted a missing lemon slice from the pantry. Hargrove took it to delay his own tea service and create an alibi gap. Captain Vale's broken alibi at the club proved a red herring. He was nowhere near Belgravia that night. Thorne's knowledge of the will change was genuine but irrelevant. Hargrove acted before any codicil could be signed. The motive links followed. Link 5, the past in India. The 1872 plantation fire. Insurance fraud by Captain Vale. Blame shifted to Batman Hargrove. Discharge in disgrace, loss of pension, ruined life. Hargrove returned under alias, entered service to watch and wait. But when Sir Edmund spoke of altering the will, perhaps fearing old secrets resurfacing, Hargrove struck. The forged suicide note in imitation hand read, "The burden is too great." Not Sir Edmund's words, but Hargrove's demand for acknowledgement of the old betrayal. Finally, Holmes held up the small brass key. Link 6, the final connecting link. This key, hidden for 20 years, used to lock the door from inside, then carried away and nearly replaced in panic last night. A guilt drove him back to the scene. Without it, the impossibility stood. With it returned, the illusion might have held longer, but conscience and our vigilance prevented that. Hargrove lifted his head. His voice was low but steady. It is all true, every word. I waited decades for justice. When he spoke of changing the will, I saw my moment. I loaded the revolver days earlier. I waited in the passage until he sat alone. I stepped out, called him Captain, watched the recognition in his eyes. One shot. Then I locked the door and left. The note I wrote myself. His hand was easy to copy after years of seeing it. Lestrade exhaled heavily. Good God, Holmes! A locked room, a missing key, and 20 years of hatred. We'd have buried it as suicide. Holmes regarded the prisoner. You chose a path of silence and patience, Hargrove. But observation defeats deception. The ground remembers every step, and logic binds every link. Hargrove met his gaze without flinching. Then bind me, mister. Holmes, the chain is complete. I accept it. The constables stepped forward. The irons clinked as they adjusted them, the sound sharp in the warm room. Hargrove was led away without resistance, footsteps echoing down the 17 steps to the street below. Lestrade lingered a moment, hat in hand. You've done it again, Holmes. Scotland Yard owes you. Holmes inclined his head slightly. Justice owes nothing. It merely arrives, link by link. The door closed behind them. The fire crackled on. Every link accounted for. The chain complete. Chapter 8. Justice in Chains. The morning after Hargrove's confession broke cold and clear. The first sharp frost of the season glazing the cobblestones outside 221B Baker Street. The coal fire in our sitting room burned low but steady, its warmth barely reaching the corners where the chill still lingered. The air carried the familiar bite of Holmes's tobacco, now mixed with the faint, acrid trace of gunpowder that clung stubbornly to his ulster from the night before. Mrs. Hudson had brought up hot tea and toast. The steam rose in thin curls, carrying the bitter taste of strong black leaves across the table. A telegram arrived just as we finished. Lestrade's hand, terse and official. Hargrove remanded Bow Street. Formal charge murder. Inquest tomorrow. Request presence. Holmes folded the paper neatly and placed it beside his pipe. The Scotland Yard moves with unusual speed, he observed. They wish the matter closed before the press sniffs deeper into Sir Edmund's Indian past. We took a hansom cab to Bow Street Magistrates' Court. The wheels crunched over thin ice on the roads, the horse's breath steaming white in the bitter morning air. Foghorns still sounded faintly from the river, though the yellow-brown shroud had retreated for now. The courthouse smelled of polished oak, old paper, and the sharp sting of carbolic soap used to scrub the cells below. Hargrove stood in the dock, hands manacled, face drawn, but composed. His black coat had been replaced by a plain prison tunic. The irons clinked softly as he shifted. Lestrade sat in the front bench, notebook open, while a small knot of reporters scribbled furiously in the gallery. The magistrate, a stern-faced man with spectacles perched low on his nose, read the charge in a flat voice. John Hargrove, you are accused of the wilful murder of Sir Edmund Vale on the night of the 15th instant by shooting him with a revolver in his own study. Hargrove raised his head. Guilty, sir, as I confessed to Mr. Sherlock Holmes. A murmur ran through the court. The magistrate frowned. You understand the gravity? No plea of not guilty? None, Hargrove answered quietly. I waited 20 years. When the moment came, I took it. The chain is forged. I do not contest it. Holmes, seated beside me, watched without expression. His fingers remained steepled beneath his chin, the smooth leather of his gloves cool against his skin. The prosecutor rose, a young barrister with nervous energy. The Crown accepts the prisoner's plea. Evidence presented by Mr. Sherlock Holmes includes the secret passage with matching boot prints and clay traces, the recovered key bearing the prisoner's prints, forged suicide note in imitation handwriting, and the prisoner's own detailed confession, corroborated by timeline and witness statements. Lestrade was called to confirm. He stood stiffly, hat under arm. I was present when Mr. Holmes confronted the prisoner in Vale House. Hargrove produced the missing key himself. He admitted loading the revolver, waiting in the passage, firing after revealing his identity, then locking the door from inside and retreating. No coercion, full and voluntary. The magistrate nodded. Any mitigation? Hargrove spoke before his solicitor could rise. None sought. Sir Edmund betrayed me in India, set fire to his own stores, blamed me, ruined my life to save his fortune. I served him in silence for years. When he spoke of changing his will, perhaps fearing the old fraud would surface, I acted. One shot. Justice, in my view. A ripple of whispers spread. The magistrate rapped his gavel. This court is not for moral debate. The plea is guilty. Committal to the Old Bailey for sentence. Prisoner remanded in custody. Hargrove was led below, her footsteps echoing on stone stairs. The irons clanked with each step, a sound like the final tightening of chains. Outside the court, Lestrade approached us on the steps. The cold wind whipped his coat-tails. His breath fogged the air. "You saved us a trial, Holmes," he said gruffly. "The Commissioner is pleased. No messy locked-room nonsense in the papers. We've tied up the loose ends. The revolver was Sir Edmund's, loaded by Hargrove days earlier. The blanks were Indian issue, hidden in his room. The forged note matched samples from Sir Edmund's desk." Holmes inclined his head. "And the innocent?" "Cleared. Captain Vale's debts remain his own burden, but no suspicion of murder. Thorne's ledgers showed only routine work, no complicity. Eliza and Mrs. Grady return to service elsewhere. The household dissolves quietly." We walked toward the Strand, the sun low and pale, casting long shadows across the pavement. The air tasted crisp with frost, undercut by the distant smell of coal smoke from factory chimneys. Holmes drew upon his pipe thoughtfully, the smooth bowl warm in his palm. "Loose ends explained," he murmured. "The passage sealed, the key returned to evidence, the motive laid bare in court records. Hargrove's life was broken in India. He broke another to mend his own sense of justice. Yet the law sees only the act, not the decades of silence that preceded it." Lestrade grunted. "Law isn't philosophy, Holmes. It binds what it can." We parted at Charing Cross. The criminal stood bound now, irons on wrists, chains of evidence complete. Justice, in its imperfect way, had served. The criminal bound, justice served. Chapter 9. Links restored. The inquest at the Old Bailey concluded swiftly on the 9th day. The courtroom heavy with the scent of polished wood, old ink, and the faint coal smoke that drifted in from the street whenever the doors opened. A thin frost still clung to the windows, making the glass panes cold to the touch, and the winter sun cast pale, watery light across the benches. I sat in the public gallery beside Holmes, notebook in hand. As the coroner delivered the verdict, willful murder by John Hargrove, committed with premeditation. The jury nodded solemnly. No dissent. Sentence would follow at the assizes, but the legal machinery had turned. Outside, The air tasted sharp with frost, and the distant tang of Thames mud carried on the wind. Hansom cabs clattered past, wheels crunching over scattered ice, while Big Ben tolled the hour with deep, resonant notes that vibrated through the stone. Holmes drew upon his pipe thoughtfully, the smooth bowl warm against his gloved palm. "The chain of justice holds," he said quietly. "Now we restore what suspicion fractured." Our first call was to Lionel Thorne, who had remained at Vale House to catalogue the estate papers under the solicitor's supervision, and the library smelled of old leather bindings, fresh ink, and the faint pomade Thorne still used. He looked thinner, eyes shadowed, but relief showed when we entered. "Mr. Holmes," he greeted, rising quickly, "the papers are in order. Sir Edmund's will stands as it was. No codicil signed. Captain Vale inherits the bulk, though debts will swallow much of it." Holmes nodded. "And you?" Thorne hesitated. "I feared suspicion would cling. My knowledge of the will change. It seemed damning." "You were never more than a link in the chain of events," Holmes replied. "Not the forger. Hargrove imitated Sir Edmund's hand far more skillfully. Your ledgers cleared you. Your alibi, working late in this very room, was confirmed by the maid. You are free of shadow." Thorne exhaled, shoulders dropping. "Thank you. I have accepted a position with a tea importer in the city. A new start." Next we visited Eliza in the servants' hall of a neighbouring house, where she had found temporary refuge. The kitchen was warm, smelling of baking scones and carbolic soap, the fire crackling brightly. Eliza curtsied, eyes still red-rimmed but brighter now. "I thought I'd never work again," she whispered. "They said the house was cursed. Locked rooms, hidden doors." Holmes spoke gently. "The house was only a stage. The actor has been removed. Mrs. Legrady has already taken a place in Kensington. She speaks well of you. References will follow." Eliza smiled for the first time. "I'll go back to service. Thank you, sir." Captain Reginald Vale we found at his club in Pall Mall, the morning room rich with cigar smoke, leather polish, and the sweet burn of brandy. He sat alone, glass in hand, face haggard but defiant. "You've come to gloat?" he asked as we approached. Holmes sat opposite without invitation. "To conclude, your uncle's death was not your doing. Hargrove acted alone. Your debts remain yours, but no murder charge attaches." Vale stared into his glass. "I hated him, yes, but I didn't pull the trigger. The inheritance, it'll pay what I owe, barely. Then I'm for India again. Clear the slate." Holmes rose. "Clear it honestly this time. The chain spares you." We returned to Baker Street as afternoon faded. The fog had begun to creep back, softening the gas lamps into yellow halos. Mrs. Hudson met us at the door with hot tea. The tray bore the clean scent of lemon slices and the warmth of fresh scones. We settled before the fire, its crackle filling the quiet. "The innocents are cleared," Holmes said, drawing upon his pipe. "Thorne resumes his career untainted. Eliza finds new employment without whisper of scandal. Captain Vale escapes the gallows, though not his own reckoning. Mrs. Grady returns to her pots and pans, her loyalty unquestioned. The Vale house will be sold, its secrets sealed with fresh paint and new tenants." I closed my notebook. "And London? London forgets quickly," Holmes replied. "The fog rolls in, the gas lamps burn, the cabs rattle on. A locked room murder becomes yesterday's headline, then a footnote. Order returns to the streets, not perfect, but restored. The chain that bound the guilty now releases the blameless. Outside, footsteps hurried past on the pavement, muffled by gathering mist. A hansom cab clattered away into the dusk, its wheels singing on the stones. The cold pressed at the windows, but inside the fire held steady. Holmes leaned back, eyes half closed. The science of deduction does not merely catch criminals, Watson. It restores balance. When every link is tested, the weak shatter, the true hold. And so the city breathed again. The frost would melt by morning. The papers would print the verdict, then turn to fresher scandals. London's pulse, steady and unceasing, it would continue. Order restored to London's streets. Chapter 10. By the Fire at Baker Street. The 10th evening after the case's close found us back in the familiar glow of 221B Baker Street. The fog had returned in earnest, thick and yellow-brown, pressing against the window panes like a living thing. Inside, the coal fire burned high and steady, casting warm orange light across the worn Persian rug and the smooth leather of our armchairs. The room smelled richly of Holmes's shag tobacco, with the faint sweet burn of brandy in 2 glasses on the side table, and the clean lemony trace of Mrs. Hudson's tea tray left earlier. Outside, the muffled clatter of hansom cabs faded into the night, replaced by the low moan of fog horns along the Thames, and the distant toll of Big Ben marking the hour. Holmes lounged in his chair, legs stretched toward the fire, fingers steepled beneath his chin. His pipe sent thin blue curls upward to join the haze near the ceiling. I sat opposite, his notebook closed at last, the weight of the past days settling into quiet reflection. "A satisfying conclusion," Holmes murmured, eyes half closed. "Hargrove awaits his fate at Pentonville. The papers have moved on to fresher scandals. London breathes again." I poured brandy into both glasses, the liquid catching the firelight like molten gold. Yet I still marvel at how the chain formed, link by link, from a smudge of clay to a confession in the dark. Holmes smiled faintly. "And that is the essence of the method, Watson. Observation alone is useless. It is the forging of connections that reveals truth. Each clue, a boot print, a scratched key, a disturbed line of dust, is but raw material. The mind must heat it in reason, hammer it with logic, until the links bind unbreakable." He drew upon his pipe thoughtfully. "Consider the chain we built. The first link, unusual clay on the sill and floor, not from the carpet, not from the street outside, but that alone suggested entry by hidden means. The second, 3 expended cartridges, but only 1 wound, misdirection, blanks fired to confuse sound and timing. The third, the absent key in a bolted room, impossibility manufactured, not natural. Then the passage itself, dust disturbed, boot marks leading both ways. Each observation meaningless in isolation. Together, they formed an iron chain." I nodded slowly. "And the past case parallels strengthened every forge. In the Norwood builder's hidden cupboard, the speckled band's bell-rope passage, the crooked man's old Indian grudge, each echoed here, reminding us that human nature repeats its patterns. Ground remembers every step, as you so often say." Holmes leaned forward, eyes gleaming with that peculiar light. "Precisely. Deception relies on isolation, on making each act appear disconnected. But the trained eye sees the thread that runs through them all. Why did Hargrove return to replace the key? Guilt? Well, yes, but also fear that the impossibility would unravel too quickly and point directly to him. He could not resist completing his illusion, and that compulsion became the final link. He paused, gazing into the flames. The science of deduction is no magic, Watson. It is relentless attention to detail, refusal to accept the convenient, and the patient forging of connections. When you eliminate the impossible, locked room with no key, suicide with no motive, what remains, however improbable, must be truth. Here, truth was a man wronged 20 years before, waiting in silence until the moment fate offered revenge. I sipped the brandy, its warmth spreading through me against the cold beyond the glass. And the innocents? They suffered shadows they did not deserve. Shadows dissipate in light, Holmes replied. Thorne resumes his work untainted. Eliza finds new service without gossip. Captain Vale inherits his burdens, but not a noose. Mrs. Grady returns to her kitchen. The chain that bound the guilty released the blameless. That is the true measure of the method, not merely to catch the criminal, but to restore order where suspicion fractured it. He rose and paced slowly before the fire, the floorboards creaking under his steps. I have seen chains break under poor forging, hasty conclusions, overlook details, prejudice masquerading as logic. But when every link is tested, when motive, means, and opportunity align with physical fact, the chain holds. It binds the guilty as surely as irons, and frees the innocent as surely as dawn scatters fog. He stopped, turning to me. This case reminds me most of the Red-Headed League, seemingly absurd events hiding a deeper design. There, too, a locked premise concealed crime. Here, a locked room concealed betrayal. In both, the criminal underestimated observation. They believed the surface would suffice. They forgot that every step leaves a trace, every lie a contradiction, every secret a key waiting to be found. The fire crackled, sending sparks upward. Holmes returned to his chair and picked up his violin, plucking a few soft, thoughtful notes that hung in the warm air. To the listener who has followed these events, he said, voice low and direct, remember this, truth is not hidden, it is overlooked. Train your eye to see the small, the clay smudge, the scratched brass, the creak in the night. Forge connections without haste. Test every link. When the chain is complete, no deception can withstand it. The game is never truly over. It merely pauses until the next puzzle presents itself. He set the violin aside and raised his glass. Until the next chain forges, dear listener, the game continues. The fog pressed thicker outside, muffling the city's sounds. Inside, the fire burned on, warm and steady. London slept under its blanket of mist, order restored, the chain of this adventure complete.